So today we're looking at RPCS3 for a Windows PC. So I last covered this one in middle of July this year. And of course, RPCS3 gets many changes, updates, in fact, daily updates. So why do you want to emulate your PS3 games? Well, one, if you use a PC, just like me, it's a lot easier than switching on the PlayStation 3 all the time. Another good reason is that you get higher resolutions, you can mess around with video settings, and it simply looks so much better than real PlayStation 3 hardware by a mile shot. So there's many different reasons to be emulating PS3. On top of all that, PS3 hardware, let's face it, is very old nowadays, breaking down, yellow light of death, or hardware failure. Another good reason is that we can actually connect any controller to our RPCS3, so we're not restricted by using a 6-axis. Although I admire these controllers and they're one of my favorite controllers, I'm actually very fond these days of using my Google Stadia controller for playing my old retro games. So there's lots of different reasons why we should be emulating PS3 games nowadays. So if you want to learn how to get this up and running, check this video out. Okay then, so first things first, if you're new to my channel, make sure you hit notifications, subscribe and like. So we're looking at RPCS3 again today, and like I said just a minute ago, I last covered this in middle July this year actually, but RPCS3, it gets many different updates every day pretty much. Bug fixes, everything really, even enhancing it with new features, new options added into its graphical user interface. So we need some prerequisites, and let me just remind you that if you're running this through a potato of a computer, in other words, a low-end computer, you're not going to get too far, and you can mess around with the video settings for all eternity, but you're simply not going to get a smooth experience at all. So my advice is only do this if you've got a fairly decent computer, a decent CPU, and a decent GPU. Also, make sure to check the website's requirements for a smooth experience using RPCS3. So let's take a look at the website first of all, and here's RPCS3. And what we're going to do first is look at compatibility. Now, the thing which I admire most about RPCS3 is the fact that it was a system, PCS3 that is, that was never going to be emulated, but clever people made this happen. So if we look at the compatibility list to date, if we just click on the playable tab just here, playable pretty much means all of these games are going to run 100% perfect, and there's loads, and the list keeps going on. Pretty much every couple of days something's added. And if we go to the in-game, as it says just here, in-game on the library of RPCS3 supported games can't be finished, have serious glitches, or have insufficient performance. So my advice really is to stick with the playable section if you intend to play your games all the way through, and trust me, there is a lot of supported games here through the playable category, loads in fact. So once we establish which games you want to play on RPCS3, just make sure you check it on the list first. You know, just don't randomly go into it extracting your PS3 game to find it doesn't work. So what we're going to do is download RPCS3. And I'm going to download this for Windows. Like I say, I'm using Windows 11. Now for Linux and Mac OS users, it's going to be a very similar process, although I don't use this on Linux or Mac OS, so I can't really comment on how well games run on those platforms. So I'm going to download the Windows version, and that's a fairly quick process. Now, I've had to open up the PlayStation.com website on Edge. For some reason, Google Chrome just won't download the firmware, and the firmware is what we need. So on the PlayStation.com website, if we just scroll down to Update PS3 Console System Software, Update User Computer, Download PS3 Update, and should you get a little window pop up like I've got just here saying that it might be unsafe, Obviously, this is PlayStation.com official website. Of course, it's safe. So we just click on the horizontal lines just there, keep and keep anyway. And that's going to download what's called a PS3 updat.pub. And this is what we need to make RPCS3 work. Just remember, RPCS3 is simulating a PlayStation 3, and of course real PS3 console is not going to work without firmware, of course, so obviously the same goes for RPCS3 on this. Now, for a smoother experience, and I'm not advertising this company at all, we got Razer Cortex, and what Razer Cortex does is frees up lots of memory on your computer, and it takes away background applications which might be running in the background. So in terms of RPCS3, obviously we need something chunky, substantial to run the games at a decent frame rate. So I recommend downloading Razer Cortex to free up memory in the background. And just remember, when you're running a computer, there's lots going on in the background, and it's all going to affect your emulation experience. Another way, if you don't fancy downloading that Razer Cortex, is just Control Alt and Delete Task Manager. And in Task Manager, you can then see all the applications in background processes. So it's a simple case of just going through each one of these, right clicking and ending the task. So that's going to make things a little bit quicker for your RPCS3 gaming. So that's something else to consider, just to boost up your frame rate and general emulation. So we've got these downloads, we've got RPCS3, and we've also got the firmware. So let's actually get these running. So when you downloaded your RPCS3 emulator, you'll likely download it in a zip file. What we're going to do is just create a new folder wherever you want on your computer. I'm going to just do this on my desktop. So right click, new folder, and I'm going to just call this one RPCS3. And if I drag that zipped file inside of this folder I just created, let's just extract this. So I'm using WinRAR. Just right click on it, WinRAR extract here, and you're going to get lots of goodies come out of here. And once this has been extracted, we can then delete this WinRAR archive. So the one we're looking at here is rpcs3.exe, and this is also known as executable file. So if we just double left click, this is the first thing you're going to see. So create desktop shortcut, that's just easier access rather than having to go through this folder to find that executable. And if you like, you can create a start menu shortcut, that's up to you. But until then, just read the terms and conditions and then check I have read the quick start guide and do not show again and continue. So this is the main user interface for RPCS3. So we need to install that firmware. So to do this, we're going to go up to the top left and we're going to go to File and Install Firmware. And the firmware I just downloaded from the PlayStation website. It's on my desktop, so I'm going to double left click on the PS3 updat.pub and give that a few seconds to install, and just check do not show again. Okay. Now we're then going to go onto this little compiling PPU modules process. So depending on your hardware specs, then this can take a little while to do. Okay, so once that's finished compiling, everything's good to go. Now, the next thing I'm going to make you aware of is that RPCS3 uses a system called shaders. So when we're loading games, shaders will be compiling and your games will at first appear very laggy. Even if you're running a higher end system, I'm using a i7 11th gen Intel processor paired with RTX GPU. And I'm running 16 gig of RAM, so I've got more than enough hardware to be supporting these games. So going back to shaders, what it does is compiles the shaders, which is essentially grabbing all the data and the graphics from the game, and it's kind of putting it into a folder, a cache folder. So on the second time we run the game, the parts of the game which has already been cached will then run more smoothly, in fact 100% smoothly, depending on the game, of course, if you're playing one of those under the playable compatibility list. So we've got all this up together, and what I'm going to do next then is first of all add my controller. So my controller has just been paired. I'm using, like I say, a Google Stadia controller for this. So we're going to need to configure the pad. So let's go to the pad tab just here at the top. So under player 1 at the top, the way I'm connecting my Bluetooth controller with this is by just selecting SDL. Some of you might find X input is going to detect your controller, but in my case it's the SDL. And here we go. So under devices with SDL selected, we can now see Google Stadia Controller 1, which is what we want. And now it's just a case of mapping out your controller. So if I just go to D-pad and press up, I'm going to use my Google Stadia just to press up on there. But by the seams of it, this has automatically configured. So I'm pretty much ready to go with that. But that's how you do it if it doesn't automatically set it up for you. So once we've done this, what we're going to do next is just go down to save at the bottom. And we're next going to add some games into this user interface. So to do this, we're going to go to File, Add Games. And my game is Resistance and it's on my desktop. And this is in JB format. So if you're not sure what that is, I suggest you go and Google what type of format this is. But like I said at the start, and like the RPCS3 website also states, your best experience is to actually rip your own games from disk and just convert them into this format. So I'm going to select Resistance, select Folder, and as we can see, this has now been added into RPCS3, complete with compatibility, playable, and it's also saying which supported resolutions this is. So Resistance was a launch title for the PlayStation 3. I remember really well because it was one of the reasons I wanted a PlayStation 3. PlayStation 3 by far is probably, I'm going to say actually, my favourite console of all time. I'm more of a Commodore 64 fan, but with consoles, PlayStation 3 will always win. So what we're going to do next is actually launch the game. So if I double left click on it, again, we got this loading PPU modules, compiling PPU modules, just like a minute ago when we was installing the firmware. Unfortunately, you will have to wait for this. And like I say, my gaming laptop has got fairly decent specs and this still takes a little while to do. But this is a one-time process and you won't have to do this every time. So just let this do its thing. Now, before the actual game boots up, you'll notice in the bottom left-hand side, you'll see shaders, compiling shaders, as you can see just there. And that's what I mentioned earlier on in this video, is that, again, this is a one-time process. So I'm going to just let this run. And then we're going to look at video settings. And we're also going to show you full screen mode on this. So just maximize that for now. And everything it's doing is saying saving to the hard drive. Of course, RPCS3 is simulating real PS3 hardware. So what it's doing is using the folder of where you installed it to put all that data. And it's using one of the folders in RPCS3 as the hard drive. So as we can see, that's running really well, even on my first fresh boot of this game. And yeah, like I say, it's one of the reasons why I wanted a PlayStation 3 to begin with. It's such a great game, as well as its sequel. But they're all generally good games, so they're definitely worth playing if you're into FPS games. So what we're going to do next then is look at video settings. So if you notice during that gameplay there was screen tear, we can change that. So if we go up to config, under config, you're going to find many different options here. My recommendation, if you're having problems with booting up a game, if you get a black screen or there's weird artifacts on your games when you're playing them, just Google RPCS3 and then put in the name of the game, and it will generally bring up a wiki of which settings to use to get that game running fine. So if we look at GPU, normally if you get issues running a game, you just need to change your render. By default this is selected as Vulkan, but OpenGL might be the reason to change drivers over if some of your games are failing to load. We've also got aspect ratio. Obviously PS3 was in the era of being 16:9. We got anisotropic filtering and anti-aliasing. So anisotropic filtering is going to apply a slight filter to your games just so they don't look so pixelated, but at the cost of your computer's resources. So of course if you drag this up to say 16 or even 8 times, you're going to find some lag. Now the good thing is with resistance is that it's well optimized and it can handle some of these settings even on the most sort of average computer. And anti-aliasing, if we keep this one to auto, that's going to take away jagged edges. So I'm going to put anisotropic filtering onto 4 times on this one. And under default resolution, by default, most PlayStation 3 games are actually in 720p, with the exception of a few games running at 1080p. Now you can change this, but I recommend just leaving it as it says to recommended. But I'm going to put this one onto 1080. Now underneath this we got resolution scale. Now again, just like the anisotropic filter, if you boost this up, this is going to take us up to 4K and beyond. But like I say, go very careful, because the further up you drag this, the more strain it's going to put on your hardware, and all of a sudden your computer is going to sound a bit like an aeroplane. So just go very careful with that. So default resolution up at the 1080p, and I'm also going to drag the resolution scale up to 1080p, which already by far is going to be looking a lot better than the original PS3 hardware. Resolution scale threshold, I always keep this on 16:16. Now like I was just saying, if you do a Google search and look for RPCS3 game on its wiki, sometimes it will say to change the resolution scale threshold. For this I'm going to just leave this to 16:16. Now, what I was saying just a minute ago about jagged gameplay, screen tear, under additional settings, if I just check VSync on this particular game, that should take that away. So if I just apply these settings now and save, and we can also change video settings as per game. So if we right click on a game in our library, we can go to create custom configuration, and we can do what we just did just a minute ago in that config tab, but we can do it as per game. So rather than keep going through all the settings on every game you load, you can do it individually. So that's worthwhile of looking at. So let's just close out of this for now. And something else which is pretty cool is at the top you've got listed in grid. If we put this on grid, your PlayStation 3 library will display in little grids, just like it says. And if we expand this, your games get bigger. So say you've got several games, it's going to look a little better, I think, than just having it as list. In terms of game patches, if we right click on the game itself, if we just go down to manage game patches, new patches are available. Do you want to update? Just press yes. And your patch file is now up to date. And if we just left click on this one, it will then give you a couple of different options to enhance your game. So for example, extended field of vision and unlock FPS. So for this, I'm going to check unlock FPS, and that should then bring us up to a full 60 frames per second, well 33 to 60 frames per second, or FPS as people could say. Apply and save, and if I right click on the game, we can then boot with custom configuration or boot with global configuration. So we also got boot with default configuration, but for this I'm going to go with boot with custom configuration because I've just played around with some video settings and I want to see how this looks. Into full screen, I'm just double left clicking on the screen, that is. And as you can see, it saved the progress from the last time I played it, and we're straight into the game.
They've gotten up on us! Thunder! Target the hostiles on the balcony!
So there we go, and I'd dearly love Sony to make a Resistance 4, it'd be very nice. It's been many years since Resistance 3 came out. And if we go up to File and boot VSH/XMB, we can then go into the PlayStation 3 XMB menu. Although it's a little bit useless and you can't do anything, it's pretty cool to simulate this on a Windows PC. So again, this part is going to take a while if you want to do it. And in future, RPCS3 development team are actually going to incorporate this into the emulator itself by the seams of it. So you can probably launch your games through the XMB. And so once that's done, what we're going to do next is just press allow. And the database on the system storage will be rebuilt. Then just go ahead on this part and press OK with your controller. And then rebuilding database, do not turn off the system. Like I said, it's actually simulating a real PS3. So it's going to ask you for these things. And again, we're back onto the PPU modules compiling. If I double left click, and we then got the initial PlayStation 3 setup just like the real deal. So English, United Kingdom in my case. HDMI device was selected, yes. And like I say, you can really put whatever you want in here. Like I said, XMB, unfortunately, right now, isn't available to play our games through it. It's a work in process, like I say. So here we go, under your game section, you're likely going to find corrupted data. Like I said, it's kind of useless at the moment, but it's just to show what's to be eventually for RPCS3. So, you know, having this option here is pretty cool in itself. But, you know, if you want to mess around with theme settings like you would on a real PS3, just go to theme. Airpaint was always one of my favourite themes for PS3 back in the day. And obviously, if we go to the PlayStation Network, it's not going to happen, but it's there, and I'm sure in future we might be able to do something with this. And as I'm recording this video, I'm pretty sure the PlayStation Network store is actually down for PlayStation 3. Let's face it, PlayStation 3 is a very old machine nowadays. So to exit out of here, all I'm going to do is just double left click anywhere on that screen. So finally, if you've got PlayStation Network games you've got copies of, then to install EDATs or packages, just go to File, Install Packages, Wraps, EDATs, and then it's just a case of searching for those files and installing them. It really is that simple. And finally, the very last thing I'm going to show you today is always make sure RPCS3 is up to date. Like I said, it pretty much updates every day. Sometimes when you boot it up, it will prompt you to update it. If you don't get that prompt, then just go to Help at the top just here and go to Check for Updates. And as it says in my case, my version is already up to date. Normally this part will say it's last updated a few days ago, so update to the new version of RPCS3. In that case, just press yes or install. So that's it for today's RPCS3 setup guide for a Windows PC. As you can see, it's a fairly simple emulator to get running on Windows PC, but there is some waiting times, and like I've been saying, it's not always the case. Once you go through the compiling module sections and go through the shaders, you should get a really flawless experience, providing you're playing one of the playable games from the compatibility list on the RPCS3 website. So like I say, without a doubt, this is the best way to play your PlayStation 3 games in 2023. So if you're new to my channel, obviously hit notifications, subscribe and like so you don't miss up and coming retro emulated content I upload daily on my channel, Just Jamie. Also find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and TikTok. And no pressure added, but I'm also asking for donations for my channel, so next year I can go on to bigger and better emulation setup tutorials. But anyways, until next time, stay retro.